Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel, and today we have a very interesting individual from the British Microlight Aircraft Association. For those who are around the world, that's the BMAA, and we have Rob Hughes this evening. So Rob, welcome to the channel. I can see that as most people who I interviewed always seem to have a chart in the background of the United Kingdom, especially an aviation chart.
Well, I took this office over only a few months ago and it was sitting in the corner. It's actually from 2017.
So clearly
But
out of
rather
date.
than throw it away, I thought I'd put it on the wall.
Good choice, good choice. So as I said, welcome to the channel. And for those outside the UK, you have taken over the position of Chief Executive Officer of the British Microlight Aircraft Association. And I thought, I didn't know too much about it. We have met a few times over the years, as I sort of alluded to before, and sort of went, oh, I have met you before. So I had a cheeky look into your LinkedIn profile, and there's some quite interesting topics in there, and that you're basically part of the Royal Aero Club committee, the chairman of the Fédération Aviation Internationale, I think that's what the FAI stands for, committee, and also you're a sign language interpreter. That's one thing I've always been intrigued by, is sign language. But beside all these positions, how did you actually become involved in aviation?
Well, it's a good question. Like most people, I've had an interest from a young age in models and generally in flying. But it really came about in 1993, 94. I'd taken up skydiving. And to accelerate my progress, I went to Florida to go on a course. Sadly, after a few jumps, broke my ankle.
Ooh, ouch.
Quite badly, so I had to stop skydiving. But I spent the next few days while waiting to get the plane back home, looking at the pilots, talking to the pilots, and actually I was lucky enough to get in the right-hand seat of one of the jump planes, and I realized that probably the pilots are having more fun than the skydivers. So it took a couple of years. Then I had a flight with my cousin, who's a microlight instructor. He had a flex-wing microlight, a Blade 912. He took me flying. That was my first experience of a microlight back in about the year 2000. And we had an engine failure.
Ooh.
We had water in the fuel, and my cousin said, I'm going to go quiet. I'm looking for a field to land in. And then he gave me a 2-minute narration on how to do the perfect forced landing.
And that was your introduction to flying.
I returned to the airfield and I signed up straight away.
Wow. Okay. I've had an engine failure. I'm going to learn how to fly. Sounds like a really good way to get into aviation.
If that's the worst that can happen, sign me up.
If that's the worst, yes. So I'm glad you mentioned flexwing, because clearly I have a slight passion for flexwing flying now. But in your new position of the Chief Executive Officer of the BMAA, clearly you've had some fairly big shoes to fill from Geoff, and we've had some conversations off the interview about that. Where do you see your new position going in the immediate future?
Well, firstly, you need to start by paying tribute to Geoff. It's actually quite astounding what he achieved in this role. And if you go to the BMAA website, you'll find on the awards page a link to Geoff's own description of his 15 years in this office, and he achieved a great deal. So trying to fit into his shoes would be a good start.
Okay.
But that leads into, we're a really busy organization. We really are a very busy organization, such that I've spent the first few months auditing exactly what goes on and drawing a nice picture. And this picture will be promulgated in the next month or two. So part of my problem is improving the communications, which I feel is a bit weak, to let people know exactly what we do and how we do it. So we're going to have targeted messages this year to 3 particular groups of people: the people who want to learn to fly, who know about microlights; the people who don't know anything about microlights at all, to help them understand what a microlight is; and also to the GA pilots who are going to join us and fly faster, more economical aeroplanes in the future. We're also going on tour. We're going to have a series of events throughout the summer where we'll take either our FlexWing simulator in a trailer, or we're also taking a gazebo, and we'll be visiting other people's events or holding events of our own. But then crucially, we'll be recording them. So a bit like you, Giles, we'll be having somebody with a camera, hopefully with a microphone, recording what's going on, so that we are giving a message not just to those who attend the events, but also to others who didn't attend, exactly how busy we are and what we're up to. So that's the plan for 22.
That sounds a very very broad spectrum and sort of quite detailed concept of where you want to take the committee. The association. We touched on very briefly, or actually spoke to Tim Burrow at the Microlight show at Popham last year, and that was just at the cusp of when 600 kilos was coming in. But do you see the expanse of aircraft that the BMAA support? Because again, you mentioned how busy you are, and that ranges from the sub 70 kilos, and clearly I have a soft spot for this area of flying, through to the new 600 kilo allowance. Do you feel that this will allow younger members to join the world of microlight aircraft?
Yes, certainly. I always use the analogy of the Volkswagen Golf car. As the Golf has got bigger and heavier, so it's opened up gaps below it, which have been filled by, in their case, the Polo, and then another car called the Lupo. A bit like microlights, they've tended to get heavier over time, up to 450 kilo, now up to 472.5, and then going on to 600. That allows people in the lighter end to come into the market. And you and I know somebody very well, a chap called Ben, who builds very lightweight sub 70 kilo planes. They aren't strictly part of the BMAA, they aren't strictly microlights, but I certainly recognize that they're a really easy way of getting into flying. To get people interested in flying, we, the BMAA, offer a 10-hour training course, which you can then use if you want to go into two-seat flex-wing flying and gain a license. So it's an excellent first step for those who perhaps don't have the budget, maybe don't have the time to get into the sorts of microlighting that we deal with. But we certainly want to support them. And I have a surprise, I'm not allowed to tell you what it is, but there is one coming up this year, where we, the BMAA, hope to get quite closely involved in your foot launch power hang gliding flying.
Well, I'm sure at some point we might have to do a follow-up interview just on that topic alone, if nothing else. But as you know, and we've chatted as well, that the sub 70 has allowed me to join and gain my national private pilot's license, and I kind of thank sub 70 for that, because otherwise it wouldn't have given me that route in, and I wouldn't have realised it was available to me.
Yeah.
So microlighting in the UK is very much a passion and pastime for many. But do you see the microlight license for the younger generation? And we've sort of chatted about the younger side of it and trying to encourage the youth into aviation. Do you see the younger generation as a stepping stone to the general aviation world and onto commercial licensing?
It's a very interesting point, because a few months ago, the Secretary of State for Transport, Grant Shapps, told the CAA that they had to review their licensing system to simplify it. And since then, the CAA have had a licensing review. It's going to go on for another year, maybe 2 years. But everything is in the air. And it may be that the whole structure of pilot licensing in the future in the UK will be quite different from the way it is today. Our stance is that MPPL works for us. You can learn to fly quite simply, and we have a very clear syllabus. We have a good network of instructors, and it's reasonably easy to learn to fly in a microlight. And you can progress to SSEA up to 2-ton, 4 seats. We don't want that to change. We don't see why that should change. It's working. There's no reason why it should be altered in any way. The problem is you become a pilot, you learn how to fly, but then that isn't credited if you want to go on and fly commercially. And that's the one big barrier that we're seeking to change as part of the license review, which is that you can use your experience and your knowledge that you gained on the microlight and develop it further with further training. A bit like I did recently with MPPL SSEA, I went to 2-ton, 4-seat. So that you can then progress on to what's currently known as the PPL, and then CPL, commercial, and even onto airlines. If you could have this seamless transition from how you started, Giles, all the way up to British Airways, why not? Because at the moment, we aren't recognising the skills that are gained in one form of aviation and transferring it into the other. And that's the bit that's missing.
Right. That's a comprehensive review that's going on at the moment.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
It's in its early stages.
Stay tuned.
I'm
sure there'll be more to come in the future.
It'll be a story for years. Yeah. I think a couple of years before it's finished.
Brilliant. 600 kilos. With the addition of 600 kilos, do you feel the BMAA will need to adjust its approach to both training, and I look at this from my engineering background as well as the maintenance and support requirements, because some 600 kilo aircraft, they're almost outperforming the GA aircraft. You've got fully composite aircraft that are cruising at 140 knots, yet they can be maintained by the owner.
That's not new. It's been going on for at least 20 years. We've microlights like the Jabiru, like the Flight Design CT, which are perfectly capable of doing those speeds and have been doing them for more than 20 years. I remember an early flight I had back in 2001, 2002, in a Flight Design CT, or a Pegasus CT as it was then. And the speed range was unbelievable. At one point we were doing 135 knots, and the next point we were coming to land at 40. And that's the thing about the Microlight, is a brilliant range of speed that you can have. So sure, with the addition of the heavier weight, so from 472.5 kilo up to 600, there are going to be some differences. Not much, it's still two-seat, still a fairly simple aeroplane in its basis. CAA have mandated differences training if you aren't used to particular aspects of the airplane. So if it's a little bit heavier, so you have to take into consideration things like landing distances, that sort of thing.
Right.
And also if you have something whizzy on there, like a wobbly prop or retractable gear, CAA have insisted that you do some training. They've left it to us to decide exactly how that training should be. And we're in the final throes, just about to publish. In fact, today I was reading the final draft of some educational material, which leaves it up to the instructor to decide how much training you need. A bit like when you learn to fly, the instructor will finally say, that's it, you can go solo.
Particularly G.
So they can also take a look at how good you are currently and what the gap is between where you are now and where you want to be. But don't overstate 600 kilo. We've got around 1,900 in-permit aeroplanes. They're going to remain. And we're slowly going to add 600 kilos over the next few years. But it's not going to dominate the microlight world. It's going to complement it.
Gaining your national private pilot's license is a major achievement. And you've alluded to the training steps already, be it someone coming through for conventional 3-axis or flex wing. For any microlight pilot, how should that NPPL holder look to improve their skills, promoting pilot development, etc.? How do you suggest they do that?
First and foremost, go flying. Definitely, the more you fly, the more confident you are, the further you go, the better a pilot you become. But we do have other ways of encouraging you to improve your skills. I think probably the first one I should mention is the Wings scheme. This is one that was invented by Geoff Weighell a few years ago, which has now grown into quite something. It's a whole series of proficiency tests or other ways of demonstrating skills, improving yourself, learning about flying, which gets you recognition under the scheme of Wings. And you can find out more information on our website. Another thing I'd like to mention is a series of events that used to be part of a competition series, but is certainly now much more open to pilots who want to learn new skills, perhaps short landing or generally better control of their aeroplane, better understanding of their aeroplane. We're calling that the Open Series. Again, information on the website. But there are 6 or 7 events this year, probably, around the country where you can just turn up. You can do 1 or 2 or 5 tasks. You can be scored if you want. But the gist of it is that you are told to, for instance, fly in a perfect circle, with or without GPS maybe, and then you have to go off and do it. So perhaps things that you don't normally do, and you're being tested and educated and trained at the same time. A couple of others. We have another system which is through the FAI, the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, like you mentioned earlier. They have I
had less accent there, sorry.
I speak French, I used to live there. So,
oh, okay.
Called the Colibri, excuse me, which is French for hummingbird. And they are the bronze, silver and gold Colibri. If you do achieve certain tasks, fly certain distances, that sort of thing, then you can apply for one of these badges of recognition. Of course, the last thing would be, why not set a record? You could set a British or world record for altitude or speed or whatever it might be. There's a whole range of records you can apply for. And that'll certainly test you and you'll become one of the best in the world. And also the last thing I'd like to say is join your local club. There are plenty of Microlight clubs, and through social interaction, through flyouts, that sort of thing, you're going to get better. And you also have then a family of other people who've probably been through the same mistakes you've had, and they'll be able to help you through and make you a better pilot. So plenty of ways.
That nature and nurture type piece.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm very aware that for those that follow my channel from the paramotoring side, I had to join the BMAA for my altitude record. So I am very familiar for that side of it, and do still hold that record. But there was a gentleman who I interviewed recently who is trying to break my altitude record.
How dare he?
How dare he? No, I'm actually helping him do it because I will probably never do it again. So really, I feel we never really go into much detail in any of these, but just time is always against us on these interviews. But I thank you for going into those little areas, which I'm sure there will be a follow-up interview in the future when more information comes out. But where do you see the BMAA going in the next 5 to 10 years? You've given us the short-term timescales of where you want to take the association now, but where do you see it, and what's your vision for the association in the next 5 to 10 years?
It's difficult because we didn't know 5 years ago that we would be looking at 600 kilo. The way that the CAA regulations work tends to take a long time for anything to happen. So it's likely we're going to have a stable situation for the next few years. We're dipping our toes in with 600 kilo. We're talking to a number of manufacturers. In fact, I've just updated you can have a quick look at this, my list of those things that we're talking to, those manufacturers bringing in those different aeroplanes. It's growing all the time. We have another one who applied to us yesterday to bring in their aeroplane from a European country. So certainly 600 kilo is going to get bigger, but it is only 2-seat and it is only VFR. So it's not going to overtake flying completely. It is going to develop and become a nice, interesting, useful part of microlighting in the UK. We have to make sure we're ready for that. We're bringing in people who ordinarily perhaps wouldn't have considered flying a microlight before. Historically, microlights have perhaps had not so good a reputation, a bit slow, not very well built. Well, of course, that's absolutely not true these days at all throughout the range of microlights. But we have to make sure that these people feel comfortable in our club and that we cater for them and we accommodate them in our network. At the other end, as you've mentioned, we also need to try to encourage people into flying in the first place. So you may not become a BMAA member, but we want you to join the world of aviation. We do that in a number of ways. We promote aviation generally, which is in our association aims, but we also work with other organizations to make sure that we're all talking the same language. And if you start in one association, you can move to another, or we can work together to make sure that the opportunities are available to all. At all this time, we need to keep communicating. I believe it's been a bit of a weakness. We are busy and we need to develop that area, I think, more than any other. And if we do succeed in that, people will think the BMAA has changed when actually all that's happened is that you've got to know what we do already. We're not a particularly big organization. There are 7 of us in this office, and we have 3 or 4 other contractors doing specific jobs for us. So we can't achieve a great deal, but I believe we already do. It's just the bit that you do so well, Giles, that's missing.
So clearly you're the Chief Executive Officer, you were the Chairman, Tim Burrow's taken over the Chairman piece, and there's a lot of people that support the association in the wings, the likes of Rob Mott, who I thrust a camera in his face and asked him a load of questions. And I would like to try and interview more of the committee that make the BMAA function. As you said, you're a very busy, very small organisation that keep the microlight community flying. And I think there's many people out there that just, as you've touched on even now, just don't realise what goes on in the background to keep us flying in our passions and pastimes. So this pretty much wraps up the interview now. Thank you, Rob, for your time. I appreciate it's taken me a long time to get hold of you, and I appreciate your time in the evening is very precious, so thank you very much for that. The links that Rob alluded to, I will drop into the description, and say if you've got any questions, I will leave the contact details for the BMA in the description, and if you've got any comments, please drop them down below in the video. So this pretty much wraps up the video, so until next time, everybody, fly safe.